I think that the bigger question, though, and the reason I've rushed through the other parts is because the bigger question is like, well, like why? What what is the impact on the greater landscape? What does this mean moving forward for specifically college football? Why, Joel, were the stakeholders in the enterprise more inclined to settle, and what is their benefit moving forward? Well, let's talk about that. Let me touch on something that I referred to begin. The NCAA has been fighting lawsuits for a long time. There's been very little differences in all of these lawsuits. They have a flawed amateurism model. It is ripe for litigation because they will lose. So people that want to litigate that and want to sue them and win settlements are going to do that. That's going to continue to happen unless all of this changes. And I mean like in a drastic way, Because every time that the NCAA tried to shift and say, okay, we lost that lawsuit, so now we have NIL, but all of our old rules about boosters and inducements are going to stand. Well, then they try to enforce those rules about boosters and inducements, like let's say against Tennessee, and Tennessee's attorney general turns around and sues them. And so does Virginia's attorney general. So they've been totally crippled of the ability to actually govern their sport. So what you have to understand is that lawsuits will continue unless something drastically changes. Those in the enterprise knew that and know that they have to change in a major way. So they have one, I would say, cohesive and specific goal. And this settlement is the first piece in achieving that goal. What is that goal? We've got to stop getting sued. We got to get out of the courtroom. It's going to bleed them dry. The more that the NCAA or the enterprise gets sued, the more chance that it all goes away. It doesn't matter if it's House versus the NCAA in Northern California or Fontenot versus NCAA in Colorado or what used to be like O'Bannon versus the NCAA. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because all these lawsuits are similar in the way that they try to attack a flawed model, an indefensible model of amateurism. So it's going to continue until something drastically changes. So not getting sued, how does that happen? There's three main goals from not only this settlement, but for the enterprise. And these three are really important. Number one is that they need desperately some antitrust protection from the federal government, from Congress. They need it desperately. Without it, I don't know if there's a real path forward. Just like the NFL has antitrust exemption, antitrust laws are there for the true marketplace, the true capitalist marketplace, and protects against monopolies in our country, right? And listen, I'm no expert on all of this, but I know that professional sports, the only way that they can operate as we know that they operate is with antitrust exemptions. And that's exactly the model that the NCAA or the enterprise, whatever you want to call it, needs. They need antitrust exemptions. The second thing that they need is a uniform set of rules across state lines. Again, that's where Congress comes into play. They need some sort of legislation that provides a baseline of rules across state lines so that they're not operating under one set of rules in one state and a different set of rules in a different state. Can you imagine for a moment in the National Football League if the Seattle Seahawks were operating in a substantially different model because of laws in the state of Washington than the Arizona Cardinals, both in the NFC West, but because Arizona is in Arizona and the Cardinals have to operate based on Arizona law, and that they're at a severe disadvantage because of some set of rules and laws that were happening in the state of Washington, well, of course, that has to change, right? So they need some antitrust protection and they need some uniform set of rules that goes across state lines. Because until that happens, we will continue to have, regardless of who's trying to enforce rules in intercollegiate athletics, any rules, we will continue to have some states suing the NCAA and continued litigation, whether it's individuals or states, for the foreseeable future. And that's the exact opposite of the goal at hand, which is to stop getting sued. Okay, so you need both of those things, antitrust as well as uniform set of rules across state lines. The last thing that they're going for, and there are probably others, but for the sake of this podcast and this point in time, the next thing that they're going to be needing to go after is a separation. A separation between revenue sports and non-revenue sports in intercollegiate athletics. All of those things are vital for a lot of different reasons. I think that the antitrust laws are much more difficult to talk about. One, I'm not an expert on them. Two, like, you get into the legal jargon of exactly what that means and what that offers. But you understand that without antitrust exemptions, the lawsuits will continue. Without a set of rules that is similar across state lines, the lawsuits will continue. And without separation of revenue sports and non-revenue sports, lawsuits will continue. And that's where we get into questions about Title IX and exactly how this settlement is going to work within Title IX. And again, this settlement is not going to do anything about Title IX. But what it will do is start to pave the road towards these elements. It's not a direct tie, but let me tell you where the tie comes in. Congress has been incredibly slow to get involved. One, it's just a slow-moving body. That's how our founders built, the legislator. So we understand that. It moves incredibly slow. Two, there wasn't a lot of incentive for the people in our government to get involved, in particular with everything that we've been dealing with outside of intercollegiate athletics for the last 4 or 5, 6, or even 8 years. Right? They've had a lot on their mind, and it's not at the forefront of anybody's mind. So what we've seen so far up to this point is we've seen congressional hearings where Mark Emmert of the NCAA is in there and he's trying to defend amateurism, and the legislator or the Congress folks get upset with their answers and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of eye rolling, and some people want to blow it up and so on and so forth. So it's been very messy. The reason that this settlement is important is that it's basically a white flag from the enterprise, from the NCAA and from the stakeholders within the NCAA and intercollegiate athletics that signals to Congress, we are ready to actually have a real conversation. We are ready. We are moving in the direction, taking the steps necessary in order to do the things that we know we will have to anyways in order to achieve some sort of common ground so that we can get an antitrust exemption, so that we can get legislation that covers us across state lines, so that we can get separation of non-revenue sports and revenue sports so that they aren't in the murky, waters of Title IX. Because what I think everybody's question is right now, even athletic directors that I talk to, they're thinking to themselves, well, is part of this $20 million for the football team and the men's beach volleyball team, or the lacrosse team, or the women's soccer team? Because that's unsustainable from the athletic director's standpoint. If they have to abide by Title IX within this revenue sharing model, you will see massive cuts to sports across the board because there just won't be enough resources to do it right. Now, that's not a threat. I think that that's just a reality. When you start talking about these budgets and start talking about carving out $20 million annually to share with the student athletes on top of the money that universities are already paying to student athletes in the form of scholarship, in the form of wellness, in the form of training, and in the form of, in particular, food and all the meals that they give them, they're giving them a lot. They're giving them a stipend. All of that stuff already comes out of their budget. Now you're adding $20 million more to that model, so they're going to have to cut. This is why Congress is going to have to get involved and have some separation between revenue sports and non-revenue sports. See, in my mind, revenue sports need a totally different governing body, and revenue sports do, and then non-revenue sports need to operate just like we operate basically the Olympic model. Yeah, you can still have NIL. You can have all sorts of things, but the only way that they are around, to be quite honest with you, is if they are pulled out of this rev share. Because if you've got to pay the men's rower and the women's lacrosse captain the same as your quarterback, this is totally unsustainable as far as a rev share. So the separation is incredibly important, incredibly important. If you start looking at the structure, once you separate out revenue sports from non-revenue sports, you basically have 3 revenue sports at this point. You have college football as a whole, brings in about 70 to 75% of the revenue in intercollegiate athletics, or for any athletic department across the country. And then you have men's basketball, namely the NCAA tournament on the men's side, and now women's basketball because of the growth in women's basketball, and more specifically, the NCAA tournament on the women's side. Those are really the only 3 things that make money in intercollegiate athletics: women's basketball tournament, men's basketball tournament, and college football. So those need to be stripped out and taken away from all the others. And we need some sort of entity that is over college football and over basketball and governs them in a very different way than we govern all the other sports. And trying to govern them the same way is only going to get us in the same position where we will be in a lawsuit. And that's exactly what the enterprise is trying to avoid. So that's why the separation is I think, increasingly important. Now, some of the things that could happen if you have antitrust and if you have uniform rules across state lines and if you have separation between revenue and non-revenue is that you can start to look towards future dominoes falling, namely a collectively bargained agreement. I've been arguing this for a long time. These are steps in that process. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.